raw fiction.
The white noise of the ventilation system was the only thing keeping me grounded. It was a low, steady hum, a frequency I had come to rely on over the last 4 years. In the kitchen of Vitreous, that sound meant the filters were clear, the temperature was regulated, and the heart of the operation was beating as it should. I stood in the shadows of the pass, my hands tucked into the pockets of my charcoal apron, my fingers tracing the cool, smooth surface of the obsidian egg I kept there. On the other side of the stainless steel counter, Gideon was holding court. He looked magnificent. The harsh overhead lights caught the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the pristine, starched white of his chef's coat. He was laughing, that deep, infectious sound that made people feel like they were part of an exclusive club just by hearing it. He was surrounded by the evening's final guests, a group of tech moguls and a critic who had flown in from London just to taste the distilled autumn dessert. "It's about the vibration of the ingredient," Gideon was saying, his hands moving through the air as if he were conducting a symphony. "If you don't listen to what the soil is trying to say, you're just a cook. I try to stay out of the way of the produce. I let it speak." The critic nodded, mesmerized. I felt a familiar, sharp pang in my chest, a mix of pride and a strange, burgeoning exhaustion. Gideon was right, in a way. He was the voice. But I was the one who had spent 18 months scouting the specific orchard that produced those apples. I was the one who had negotiated the exclusivity contract with a farmer who originally wanted nothing to do with high-end dining. I was the one who had designed the irrigation-dependent storage system that kept the fruit at the exact humidity required for his vibration. Tonight was supposed to be the finish line. We had been awarded the highest rating possible. The reservations were booked out for a year. The struggle of the early days, the nights sleeping on flour sacks, the weeks where we shared a single-shift meal was finally behind us. I looked at Gideon and thought, we made it. The hard part is over. Now we finally get to enjoy what we built. When the last guest finally departed and the heavy oak doors were locked, the silence of the restaurant felt different. Usually, it was a triumphant silence, a shared exhale. Tonight, it felt brittle. Gideon didn't go to the bar for the usual post-service drink. He walked straight to the office, a glass-walled cube at the back of the kitchen that felt like a command center. I followed him, the weight of the obsidian egg in my pocket feeling heavier than usual. He sat behind the desk, a slab of reclaimed walnut that I had sourced from a barn in Vermont, and didn't look up as I entered. He was scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by a cold, blue light. "The expansion to the waterfront," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "I've got the preliminary permits ready. We can sign the lease on Monday." "There isn't going to be an expansion, Nara," he said. He didn't look up. "At least, not one that involves you." The air in the room seemed to freeze. I waited for the laugh, for the punchline, for him to tell me he was joking, but he just kept scrolling. "I've been doing some thinking," he continued, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly calm register. "Now that the foundation is set, I've realized that the very thing that got us here, this rigid, mechanical structure you've built, is the thing that is now suffocating my brilliance. I feel like I'm cooking in a cage. Every time I want to change a supplier or pivot the menu, I have to check in with your logistics or your budget. You're a governor, Nara, and I'm an engine that needs to run hot. The budget is why we have a roof, Gideon. The logistics are why the fish is fresh. Any clerk can buy fish," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were like polished glass, reflective, but impossible to see into. "I'm entering a new phase of my life, a higher standard of creative output, and frankly, you just don't fit the intellectual level I'm moving toward. You've become a weight. I've had the lawyers draw up a buyout for your shares. It's the market rate. You've reached your ceiling, Nara. I'm just taking the roof off so I can see the stars." He slid an envelope across the desk. It looked like an invitation. It was a termination. I didn't touch the envelope. Instead, my mind began to flood with the shared struggle he was so casually rewriting. He spoke as if he had conjured this success out of the ether, but as I stood there, I remembered the winter of our second year. I remembered staying up until 4 a.m. for 3 weeks straight, rewriting his incoherent business plan so the bank wouldn't seize our equipment. I remembered eating nothing but ramen for a month so he could buy the custom-tailored Italian coats he insisted were necessary for his image. I remembered scrubbing the grease traps myself because we couldn't afford a cleaning crew, and Gideon said the manual labor dulled his senses. It wasn't a partnership. It never had been. I had been a host, and he had been a parasite who had convinced himself he was the heart. "Don't make this messy," he said, sounding bored. "Be happy for me. I'm finally going to become what I was always meant to be." I looked at him, really looked at him, and the veil didn't just lift, it disintegrated. I saw the hollowness behind the starched white coat. I saw the insecurity that required a constant, invisible scaffolding to stay upright. He expected me to cry. He expected me to list my sacrifices, to beg for my place, to remind him of the debt he owed me. That would have given him the chance to mock me, to call me emotional, to prove I was too small for his new world. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the obsidian egg. I placed it on the walnut desk. It made a dull, heavy thud. "You're right, Gideon," I said. My voice was quieter than I expected. "I have been a very heavy weight. I'll get out of your way." I didn't sign the papers. I didn't take the envelope. I simply turned and walked out. I didn't say goodbye to the sous chefs. I didn't take my personal belongings. I left the master key on the prep table and walked out into the biting night air. I knew, with a certainty that felt like a diagnosis, that without the gravity I provided, Gideon wouldn't fly. He would simply drift into the vacuum. The collapse of my life was not spectacular. It was a slow, quiet erosion. I moved into a studio apartment that smelled of old wood and loneliness. I spent the first month in a state of sensory deprivation. For 4 years, my life had been a frantic symphony of ticket times, inventory logs, and crisis management. Now, the silence was so loud it made my ears ring. I sat on the floor of my empty living room and counted the change in my pocket. I had refused the buyout, which meant I was technically still a shareholder, but I had no access to the accounts. I had $64 to my name and a week of rent left. I felt like I was dying. I would wake up at 5 a.m., my heart hammering, my mind already calculating the seafood delivery for a restaurant that no longer belonged to me. I would reach for my phone to check the overnight temperature logs for the walk-in, only to realize I was holding a piece of plastic that had no connection to anything anymore. I was a ghost haunting my own habits. I almost called him. On the 14th night, I sat with the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over his name. I wanted to tell him that the dishwasher sensor was going to fail soon. I wanted to tell him that the linen provider was planning to hike the prices. I wanted to be the one who fixed it. I wanted to be the machine again, because being a human being was too painful. But I looked at the obsidian egg, which I had taken back from the office before I left. It was cold and unyielding. I realized that if I called him, I would be agreeing with him. I would be admitting that I was nothing without his brilliance to organize. I put the phone down and stared at the dark ceiling. I chose the silence. The glow-up didn't happen because of a miracle. It happened because of the sheer, brutal competence I had honed while carrying Gideon. 3 months in, I was working as a night manager at a 24-hour diner. It was a greasy, loud, chaotic place, but it was a laboratory. I spent my shifts watching the peacocks of the world, the people who thought they were too important for the details, and I realized that the city was full of them. Every small business owner was drowning in the mundane because they wanted to be the visionary. I realized that my lack of potential was actually just exhaustion. Without the anchor of Gideon's ego dragging behind me, I was a lightning bolt. I started the Meridian Group. It wasn't a culinary firm. It was a restoration company. I didn't restore buildings. I restored foundations. I looked for the businesses that were failing not because their product was bad, but because their systems were broken. I didn't offer vibrations. I offered protocols. I didn't offer poetry. I offered a balanced ledger. The first client was a small brewery that was losing 40% of its product to poor inventory management. The owner was a visionary who spent all his time designing labels while his fermentation tanks were leaking. I didn't talk to him about the soul of beer. I sat in his back room for 72 hours. I reorganized his pantry. I renegotiated his grain contract. I built him a scheduling system that ensured he never had 3 people standing around when there were no customers. In 6 weeks, his profit margin tripled. He tried to thank me with a speech about my energy. "It's not energy," I told him, rolling the obsidian egg between my palms. "It's just a quarter turn on a tension bolt. You just have to know which bolt to turn." Word spread. The Meridian Group became the secret weapon of the city's independent scene. I worked with a florist, a boutique hotel, and a custom furniture shop. I was making more money in a month than I had made in a year with Gideon, and for the first time, I wasn't hiding in the shadows. I was the one who owned the room. The dopamine hits came in small, quiet moments. It was the Tuesday morning I went to the grocery store and bought a bottle of $50 olive oil without checking my bank balance. It was the afternoon I realized I had slept 8 full, dreamless hours without an alarm. It was the way the air in my new office, a sleek, glass-walled space in the old industrial district, felt crisp and clean, unpolluted by the scent of frying fat and arrogance. And while I thrived, the rumors of vitreous began to trickle in. I didn't seek them out, but I couldn't escape them. The industry is a small, gossipy village. I'd be at a meeting, and a client would mention it. "Have you heard?" they'd ask. "They lost their second star. The service is a shambles. I heard Gideon is going through assistance like water." Or, "The health inspector shut them down for 3 days. Something about the refrigeration." I would just nod and change the subject. I felt a strange, detached pity for the staff. But for Gideon, I felt nothing. He was a ghost I had already exorcised. The high ground came 18 months later. I was at a gala for the Small Business Association. I was a keynote speaker. I wore a tailored suit of charcoal silk, my hair pulled back, the obsidian egg sitting on the podium in front of me like a talisman. I spoke about the invisible engine. I spoke about the necessity of the mundane. I spoke about the fact that a vision without a foundation is just a hallucination. When I finished, the room stood. It wasn't the roar of applause Gideon craved. It was a steady, respectful thunder. As I made my way to the bar for a celebratory drink, I saw him. Gideon was standing by the entrance. He looked. It's reduced. The pristine white coat had been replaced by a suit that didn't quite fit his frame. His hair was messy, but not in a styled way. It looked like he had been running his hands through it in a panic. He looked like a man who had been trying to hold back the ocean with a spoon. He saw me and moved forward, his face contorted into a mask of false warmth. "Nara," he said, his voice a pitch too high. "You look different, powerful." "I am different, Gideon," I said. "I'm visible." He flinched. He looked around the room, his eyes darting to the influential people who were nodding in my direction. He leaned in, his breath smelling of gin and desperation. "Look, Nara, I've been thinking. Vitreous. We're going through a rebranding, a back-to-basics phase. I realize now that I might have been a bit hasty. The staff, they don't have your touch. The vendors, they're being quite difficult. I'm thinking of bringing you back, not as an operations lead, but as a co-CEO, a true partner. 50-50. We'll take the Tokyo deal. We'll conquer the world." He reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "Gideon," I said, my voice as cold as the obsidian in my pocket. "Why would I want to be a partner in a failing restaurant with a C health rating and a 6-figure tax lien?" His face went pale. "How do you know about the tax lien?" "Because I was the one who managed the quarterly filings, Gideon. And when I left, I'm guessing you decided that the government was just another mundane detail that was stifling your brilliance." He stared at me. The lion, finally realizing he was in a cage of his own making. I can't do it alone, Nara. I didn't realize. I didn't know how much you were doing. Please, I'll pay you whatever you want. I'll give you my soul. Just fix the books. Just make the vendors answer my calls. It was the mission accomplished moment in reverse. He was begging me to be the weight again. He wanted me to climb back under the pack so he could stand on top of it. I'm sorry, Gideon, I said, and I realized as I said it that I truly was. I was sorry for the man he could have been if he hadn't been so blinded by his own light. But I'm too busy building my own world to spend any more time saving yours. And frankly, I like being the gravity. It turns out, when you're the one who keeps things on the table, you get to decide who sits at it. I turned away from him. You're nothing without my vision, he shouted after me, his voice cracking with a frantic, ugly desperation. You're just a clerk! You're just a girl with a spreadsheet! The room went silent. The moguls, the critics, the investors, everyone turned to look at the man shouting at the keynote speaker. Gideon realized too late that he had just exposed his own cruelty to the very people he needed to impress. He had shown the world that his soul was nothing but a hollow shell. I didn't turn back. I didn't gloat. I simply walked to the bar, ordered my water, and began a conversation with a woman who wanted to open a sustainable textile mill. Vitreous closed 3 months later. The equipment was auctioned off to pay the back taxes. I heard that Gideon moved back to his parents' house in the suburbs, telling anyone who would listen that the world had lost its appetite for true art. I still have the obsidian egg. It sits on my desk in the loft. Sometimes, when a new client comes in a peacock with a big dream and a messy ledger, I pick it up and feel the weight of it. I remember the hum of the ventilation system. I remember the white noise of a life spent in the shadows. And then I look at the white walls, the sun-drenched floor, and the team of people who know exactly who I am. I am not the weight. I am the gravity. And the world stays on the table because I make it so. I checked my watch, a simple, elegant, mechanical piece. It was 5 p.m. Time to go home. I walked out of the office. The click of my boots, a steady, rhythmic beat on the concrete. Tick, tick, tick. The machine was running perfectly. And this time, I was the one who owned the time. The sun was setting as I walked through the park, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. The air was crisp, the smell of autumn leaves swirling in the wind. I thought about the orchard, the one Gideon had claimed to listen to. I wondered if the trees were still growing, unburdened by the need to be distilled into someone else's masterpiece. I realized then that the best revenge wasn't seeing Gideon fail. It was seeing myself succeed. It was the realization that I had never been the clerk or the tool. I had been the architect all along. I had just been building someone else's house. Now, I was building my own. And the foundation was unbreakable. I sat on a bench and pulled the obsidian egg from my pocket. It was warm from my hand. I looked at it, truly looked at it, and I realized that it wasn't a weight at all. It was an anchor. And an anchor doesn't just hold things back. It keeps them from being swept away by the tide. I smiled, tucked the egg back into my pocket, and stood up. I had a dinner reservation at a small, family-owned Italian place. They didn't have a visionary chef. They just had good pasta, fresh bread, and a manager who knew exactly how the world turned. It was exactly where I wanted to be. As I walked away, the steady rhythm of my own footsteps echoed in the quiet air. Tick, tick, tick. The machine was off. The gravity was on. And for the first time in my life, I was perfectly, beautifully balanced.
Our journey ends now. If you're still here, a subscribe goes a long way for us. I've picked 2 more videos you'll love. Click over and dive in. I'll catch you in the next story. Bye for now.